Yay! Hi, Jason. Good to see you
Hey
again.
Nancy.
So tell us how we first met. Well, tell the audience how we first met.
Well, met at Meta. We were working on a project together. I was building a text editing platform, and I think you were a consumer app, the Facebook Notes
Yes,
product.
yes.
Um,
Good memory. Tell us where you are currently because the internet is cutting in and out a little bit.
I know, I'm really sorry. This is Bangkok. We're gonna do our best. Appreciate it. But yeah, RIP Notes.
Yeah. I was on a consumer team of the platform that you're basically building a platform for other teams to consume at Facebook. Did we lose you again, Jason? Okay, there we go. You're back. Okay. So tell us a little bit about who you are as a executive coach and not as a PM. What does executive coaching mean?
So I am outsiders and unreasonable humans, which means that I advise founders and teams through messy 0 to 1 transitions. Uh, that includes anything from a business going through a pivot, raising money, building a new product, uh, t- conflict within the team, but also things on the more personal side, right? Mental health, things related to family decisions or personal decisions, because um, the difference I think a lot of people would understand about executive coaching is that you're really coaching a leader, and a leader cares a lot about impact. So a lot of what you're doing is focused on their work, um, but they can't have maximum impact without taking care of themselves. So inevitably,
Mhm.
conversations about what's going on personally come up, and so you're doing some life coaching as well.
And how did you become an executive coach? You started years ago, right?
Yeah, I started while I was at Meta. I So to rewind a little bit, my family's in education. My dad's been in like the Department of Education doing teacher certification, student assessment, so like the administrative side of things. Um, and my mom was a gymnastics coach. So I was a gymnast myself. I grew up in a gym where she was coaching me, she was coaching other people. Then I worked with other great coaches as a gymnast and, had a competitive career. So my first exposure to coaching is through someone who is very knowledgeable, who cares a lot about you, who's watching out for your safety,
Mm.
and who's pushing you to be your best. So
Hmm.
that to me is sort of like the first way I experience and think about what an ideal coach does. Then in my startup career, I had a first company, a Y Combinator startup that we ran for 2.5 years. We tried to pivot and failed. I wasn't working with a coach at the time. I think we kind of got stuck between me and my co-founders. Um, and when I went and started another company years later, I decided in advance, like I'm going to work with a coach. I'm going to work with somebody um, who can support me through like staying at the company to quitting, or actually I ended up getting laid off, to starting the company, raising money, going through a pivot, raising money for the new venture, and then eventually the acquisition into Meta.
Mm.
So he really took me through that journey, and I really, I'm forever grateful. Shout out Hamilton Chan. Um, and once I was at Meta, I always felt like I wanted to have that other thing. It's such a big company; it can really swallow you up. There's so many things to think about and do.
I think we lost Jason
And
for
so
there we
I
go.
thought, let's put up a page that talks about coaching, and let's let's see what happens. And so, in 2020, end of 2020, I had my first client, worked with them. They were an early stage founder, worked with them for a little bit, and then continued to work with more and more clients over the years.
That's amazing. And when you say you were going through this transition, getting laid off and then pivoting and then joining Meta, what would have happened if you haven't had the support of a coach? How do you think it would play out on a, I guess, emotional level?
Yeah, I mean, both emotionally and practically, I think what a, I think two of the things a coach does is one, they keep you cocky, right? So that's part of it where you have to have a healthy dose of ego. So it's reminding you like, hey, I don't think you're at product market fit yet. Like these are the things you need to be doing. Don't get distracted with so much of this other stuff. And then when you're down on yourself and you're like, well, I'm the worst, then none of this is going to work. Um, the coach can also be like, look, I've seen other founders in your
Mhm.
position tell you a story about somebody who like recently went through some super tight like situation and got through
Yeah,
it. And it's like, okay, I can do that too. So they kind of like keep you from sinking too low. So keep you from making bad decisions, keep you from sinking too
I
low.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that. Tell us more about this pivot that you did, and how would you advise others who might be going through a pivot, um, and what does it mean to reinvent on a personal
Yeah. How
level
would I
or
buy?
professional level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think reinvention is one of those things that we all do, and it's just really a matter of like what time frame are we talking about, right? We're certainly very different from how we are when we graduated from college. I think compare even our college graduate to our middle school self. There's that growth. Like life is growth, life is
Mhm.
change. The real question comes when that change happens in a very compressed situation. Um, and so, the layoff at Etsy was unexpected, but also we had gone through a mass
Mm.
layoff and we had gotten a new CEO, and then the new CEO sort of was on board. So there were warning
Mm.
signs, right? In retrospect, I think we're all seeing layoffs happen left and right now. So maybe people weren't familiar with the warning signs. I think um, but stock in decline for
Mm.
a long period of time, new leadership, maybe a new direct manager, but one of my longtime managers left. Get this new manager's not talking to you. So you have to be observing your environment, being like, some things are
Yeah,
happening that are
yeah.
weird. And what's going on, right? So the new CEO did a second round
Mm.
of layoffs, and I was part of round two. Um, but at the same time, I was already thinking about this new
Mm.
business. I was already kind of working towards it. And I was already thinking like, oh, maybe I'll quit later in the year, at the end
Mm.
of the year. And so it kind of like
Right.
ejected me out early, but I was already thinking about that, right? Um, I think a lot is knowing yourself. Like we, as PMs or as leaders in general, we often have a better handling of work environments than personal environments, but the principles are kind of the
Mm.
same, right? If the 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 landscape changed for your product, you'd probably be able to think about, okay, what does our product do well? Who still can benefit from this? Or what are the new things that we could like extend into that sort of like our natural adjacent
Right.
opportunities? The same is true here, right? Like, what are you good at? Who do you know? What domain areas are you an expert in? How can you sort of like
Mm.
leverage that into what you're doing next? Um, Similarly, like I think most people don't leap into things in terms of new career opportunities, but once in a while you get carried away by something, and you're like, oh my God, this company
Yeah,
loves me.
yeah.
I should just like give notice now and just let it go. But test things before you make that
Mm.
leap, and then when you do make that leap,
Yeah.
commit to it, right? Follow through, really give it everything to give it a shot at being
Tell
successful.
us what you mean by mental toughness.
Ooh, so I think when I was an athlete, I had to think a lot about this, right? You had high pressure situations with, being in a competition
Mhm.
environment. You have to raise your hand and you have to go. There's no teammates. There's nobody else who's like going to pass the ball to you or whatever. It's like you are on stage. There
Mhm.
are a panel of
Mhm.
judges who are staring you down and looking for every single
Yes.
mistake. you make and
Yes.
writing it down and giving you a numerical
Yeah.
score, right? So you really have to put yourself in the right mindset. And there's two things. One is like practicing that ahead of time. If you have a big presentation to do at work, like
Yeah.
go through it and get yourself familiar with it. And a lot of people don't like to practice presentations because they feel awkward while they're doing it. But it's like better to feel awkward
Right.
now, get it
Right.
out of there. So that when you're in the meeting, you're not going through all of that plus them
Yeah.
grilling you
Wait, you
with
mean
what
we
you're ready
can't
for.
just
So
wing it?
you can, and maybe there'll be less like times that you feel uncomfortable, but the result will
Yeah.
not be as good, right? And so that's the thing. Are you just trying to avoid
Mhm.
discomfort, or are you trying to get a better result? So that's certainly part of it. Reflecting on your past
Mhm.
successes, going through, and sports psychologists talk about this, going through the highlight reel, writing that down, thinking about like times in the past that you've been successful, because when we're in a state when we're thinking about past successes, it's easier to envision sort of like this thing going successful. If you just think about all the times where, oh, that other presentation went bad, like you really have to like practice. We talk a lot about intrusive thoughts
Mhm.
these days. It's like you really have to like proactively fill your brain with, the good stuff. Like write it down, think about it, imagine when it was like then, to make it easier to walk into that
What
room.
if we've been hurt in the past and there's trauma and we
Yeah.
can't, like, it's hard to get back up? What can we do when that happens?
Yeah. Well, I think of trauma as similar to like when you do a skill and you get
Mhm.
hurt,
Yeah.
get injured, you mess up
Yeah,
and you fall
yeah.
down. One of the things you do as an athlete is you go back to the
Mm.
basics, right? You go back to the fundamentals. What happened? Like if you were doing a double backflip with a full twist, let's go back to the single backflip for a
Mm.
little while. Get comfortable with it, get used to it. Do some with a coach
Yeah.
spotting you, or do some with some support with another person, right? Have someone hype you up, right? Um, and then build your way back. Don't just like leap back into it. I mean, you
Yeah.
you can do that, but you may end up re-injuring yourself, right? Hitting that trauma
Right.
again, and that's going to reinforce that. So you kind of need to like step back and do things that are obviously
Right.
easy before you. I'll give you one more
Yeah.
story about that, which is like um, UFC fighters like George George St. Pierre. He's like a Canadian fighter, retired now, but his coach would say that like before big fights, he would get the best guys in his sort of weight division, and the couple days before he'd be like, "Hey, go easy on him.
Mm.
Let him beat you up a little bit. Like I don't want him. I don't want you pushing him too hard." And George would come out and be like, "Oh my God, you see him? I was like tearing him up. Like it was so easy." He's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, good, 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 good." Like, and so there was a little bit of counterfuge there, and that's what a good coach
Hmm.
needs to do sometimes, is manage your person's psychology to the utmost degree,
Tell
right?
us more about the
Um,
psychology angle. Not enough people talk about it. What happens on an emotional level when we fail and when we
I
try
mean,
to get back up again?
if you ask a bunch of, and I keep going back to these sports metaphors because I know
Yeah.
them so well, but like if you ask a series of Olympians, and they've done this with, I think, Canadian Olympic medalists, how much of your success is due to your physical capacity and how much of it is due to your mental
Yeah.
capacity. Most people will say it's somewhere like 60-40, 60%, physical, maybe
Mhm.
40% mental. But then at the most elite level and at the point where everybody's already super well
Mhm.
trained, super fit, super
Mm.
high caliber, then the mental grows and grows and
Mm.
grows. So I'm not ignoring the importance of
Yeah.
training, skill
Yeah.
development, all those like foundational things. But the higher up you go, the better you get, right? It's so much more about managing. We both worked at Meta, like Mark and Cheryl, they all have had to sit in front of like
Mhm.
congressional hearings for like 8 hours at a time. Like talk about high pressure,
Yeah.
right? Like I don't think any of us have
No.
gone through something that intense where any mistake is just going to, really cost the company, cost everybody. But they were able to dial it
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
mentally, right? It's not like any of the answers they said were so brilliant and
Yeah.
magical. It was that they didn't, you know, make any bad mistakes or insult anybody or like say something that could be construed the wrong way. So I think the mental side of it is a skill that we all have to really think about and develop in ourselves.
I love this athlete angle. I've never been an athlete, but I've been a musician and I've competed, and I've also performed on big-ish stages. So I totally
Very
I totally
similar.
relate. There's the mechanical aspect that you just train and train and train. You go on rehearsals, right? You practice going on stage, doing your thing, bow, and then go down stage. Like there's the mechanical aspect, but then there's the mental aspect that I don't think is very well understood, other than, oh, you'll be fine, go, or oh, just enjoy yourself. But it's so much more than that.
One other thing we talk about a lot is sort of what's in your control and what's out of your control, right? And self-talk. Self-talk is
Yeah.
super important. There's this great book called Endure, and it's about endurance running and like what does it mean to have endurance, because it's obviously more than just physical. It's not just like a math calculation of what your muscles have and what blood sugar you have, and that's how fast you'll go. There's so much psychology to it. So one of the guys said at the end, like, if I could change one thing about my own running background, it was to not ignore this self-talk stuff and get into it, because he had been exposed to it earlier and he kind of was like, that's not real, that's whatever. But doing all this research and writing about it, self-talk, focusing on what you want to remember. So, right, with me, what instrument did you play? Piano, right? So there's often like certain tricky in the piece and thinking about like stretching out and not like cramming down, if that was like a thing that you might have to do, like having those cues, right? Simple, like stretch, stretch at this point, or like light or whatever it was, right? Like, or, and having those cues and having them be positive and not like, don't crunch.
Right.
Like, don't crunch, right? So it's like lengthen, right? Right. So having those cues and knowing those cues, that also keeps your mind from spinning into weird directions. So having a series of cues in gymnastics, you'd be like, push, or you'd be like, wait at this point or whatever. And so you'd have these little cues for yourself that are going throughout the routine that keep your mind from wandering and getting like, oh no, did that, like you just have to be like, no, next cue. So you kind of like keep your brain on the right part of the path.
Is it possible that every strong athlete has always won? Or every athlete, I'm talking about the top athletes, or should we assume that they've all had their failures one point in time?
Well, I mean, I think you can look at anybody's career and recognize that they all have had meaningful failures, right? And the famous Michael Jordan quote about all the game time final last minute shot that he's missed, but not letting that sort of affect him and make him think, oh well, I can't do it because I messed up that one time. Right. It's like, but we often hear that at work. It's like, oh, part of the challenge at work, and one of the things I reflected on when I first entered the professional sphere, is like in sports and in music and in a lot of other things, you spend most of your time in practice and you're only performing a few times. Work is a little bit different because theoretically you're producing things
You're
all
always
the time.
performing.
You're always kind of, it's like 90%, 95% performance, 5% what you go out and you do an offsite or some speaker comes in. That's not even training. That's just like listening to somebody else tell you stuff. That's not like the same thing as practicing a skill. You just have to practice it live and be like, that was wrong. You won't get another chance to do that for like 6 months.
Right.
You're like, great. Okay, next year's planning, try better. And as an entrepreneur, right? Like I think fundraising are two things that like are so crucial, and yet you get like no opportunities to like do it before you have to do it. It's quite daunting, I think, to think about like how do you
Yeah.
get better at this thing when you get such a rare number of opportunities.
So in an environment like that, where everyone is performing, you're always on, and when you make a mistake, you feel like, oh, well, my half is shot. How do you fight this sense of comparison and self-judgment in an environment like that?
Yeah, I think, you know, to get personal, my wife is an artist, and like any creative person, right? Like there, you have a great sensitivity to color, to texture, to all these things, but also to, you know, where you sit in a social
Mhm.
standing, you know, who's doing better or worse than you. And art is very subjective, but follower counts are not subjective, right? And we, you know, worked at companies that really make quantify that were used to be unquantifiable, like who's the most popular, who's the most, you know, interested person or interesting person. And I like to tell her when she's getting into comparison that, and when I feel this too, is that the more successful you are, the more you're going to run into people who are more successful
Why
than you,
wait, sorry,
right?
why is that?
Uh, why
Yeah.
is that? It's because of the power law, right? If you look at the people who are the 50th
Uh-huh,
percentile in, let's say, income,
uh-huh.
easy thing, right? Income. One person's going to make $42,000 a year. The next person's going to make $42,100 a year. Like the person who's like 49 to 50 or 50 to 51, the difference is relatively
Okay.
small on an
Yeah,
absolute
yeah.
basis, right? But the power law shows that if you're at the, you know, percent income, you know, is like 350,000. 1% income is like
I see.
650,000. So it's like the 1% difference is
Huge. Yeah.
dramatically
Right, right.
bigger, right? So it just
Yeah,
feels
yeah.
worse. Um,
Feels worse, right.
so you have to prepare for that, right? Like there's know you're a billionaire, amazing. Uh, Elon Musk has like 150 times more money
Right,
than you know, but you're
right,
both
right.
billionaires, like. But he could buy everything you own, and like your five best friends were all billionaires, right? And he wouldn't
Right.
break a sweat. You're like, oh, that feels weird. Um, so that's step one, is to recognize that like it's
Yeah,
inevitable, and and somebody else is looking at you, as well, being like, oh my god, why can't I have
yeah.
what they have or whatever. um, but also that I remember going to a startup conference, and there was like this one company that was like the big, hot, exciting new company this year. Everybody wanted to talk to
Mhm,
them. All the investors want to
mhm.
work with them. Then we went to that same conference next year, and it was somebody
Ah,
else, and nobody was talking about
mm,
that previous, which of course feels bad for its own reasons. You're like, wait, was I not great at the beginning, or am I only great now, or whatever? But it's just sort of
yeah,
normalize that sense of like sometimes you'll
right.
be up, sometimes you'll be down, um, and even when you're up, somebody who's more up than you, and you can't let that ruin
Right.
your day, right? Because now I go back to the
Yeah,
psychology thing. If you're going to there's always somebody who you could expose yourself to information that will hurt your psychology, right? It's very easy. Just go and look at who that one person that you used to be on the same page with, and now it's like
oh,
CEO of
yeah.
something, and just go look at their
Yes,
resume for 5 minutes and look at what they're
yes,
posting, and you could feel
yes,
really bad
yes,
about yourself.
yes.
Is that going to help you? No, right?
Well, it could inspire you.
There is, if you have the right frame of
Correct,
mind going into
correct.
it. If you have the frame of mind of what can I learn
Yes,
from this? I'm in a curious
yes.
mode. I'm in a, wanting to better myself
Yeah,
mode, then you could do it. Put yourself in that
yes.
position. Um, Sometimes it's easier to look at examples from other fields, because then
Mm,
you can have like less of a thing. To throw in a pop culture reference here, I know a lot of people are invested in the Taylor Swift, Kelsey, or whatever his name is, Travis Kate Kelsey. The guy, the football player, the
Yeah.
Chiefs tight end. Um, and people have been saying like, hey, one of the challenges of being with someone like Taylor is that she's so successful, right? And she's dated other
Mhm.
artists, other
Mhm.
musicians, other people in the performing arts, and it's much easier to make that comparison
Right.
of like, oh well, she won this or she got invited to do this, and I'm not there. My song didn't do as well, or um, and so that might have put pressure on the relationship. Whereas this is a football player who's very good, and there's no comparison.
Yeah.
She's never going to do something that he really wants, and she's never going to do something that he really wants. They're in completely
Mhm.
different spheres, which maybe makes the learning easier. So maybe go and study in a adjacent field or an adjacent market if you want to like study from.
That's probably why I really love listening to motivational speakers. I don't feel intimidated by them. They're very different. They're in a completely different world. And I just love being surrounded by their content.
Who's your favorite person you're listening to right now?
Simon Sinek.
Yeah, he is, and he has had some great ideas, and he really is able to life, right? And he has all these sort of like stories of
Yeah.
different places that he's
Yeah.
gone and different people that he's not to. So he sort of brings the world to
Yes.
you.
And people criticize him for being too idealistic. Um,
Mm.
I love him though. Total fangirl here.
Simon, we're gonna get Simon on the
I
stream.
actually
Somebody set
I
aside. Yeah,
actually sent a message to his team and I
I love
asked
it.
if they could consider my my live stream.
And what do you say? Did they get
Yes,
back
they
to you?
actually did, and they were very nice about it. They said no, but that's okay. I tried.
You I love that. You
I
shot your
did.
shot. Look at you. You're
Yes.
showing it, right? Like I think as coaches, which we both have been doing, I think it can be interesting. How do you model the same
Mhm.
vulnerability? How do you model the same like
Yeah.
challenge that can come with hey, I'm out here doing things. You're just sitting here giving me advice. No,
Yeah.
right? No, you're out there putting yourself out there and being exposed to rejection. But it'll make when he really does come on the show, whether it's a year from now or
Right.
whatever, it'll feel so much better because you throw that one on the screen. You could be like, let's pull up a combo
Let me
screenshot real
bring up
quick.
my email from 10 years ago where you said no to me. Yeah, I love that. But on the coaching thing, uh, I would say coaches do a ton. It's just very a different type of work. I actually see myself as a product, and there's a market. There's a market for every product on a theoretical sense, and I am experimenting. I'm trying to learn what works and what doesn't. That's pretty much
Absolutely.
it.
Um,
Yeah, and we have um, my friend Drew on the line. Hi. Yes, that would be great if Simon would say yes to me one day. We're
we're gonna get him.
gonna
We're
get
gonna get him.
him.
This is
All right.
the first. You just got to get through the
Yes.
nose to get
Well,
into
the
the yes.
first is have the courage to go after what you want. No matter
Right.
what happens,
Right.
it starts with the courage. But even before the courage, it starts with your desire, knowing what you actually truly desire and build up the courage to do it. And then just enjoy the process.
And And Pete, I love that you're open about. I love that you're such a fan because I think about people who have been public about their
Mhm.
desires. It creates almost this dynamic of like let's root for this person together. I think of Simu Liu who
Right.
put out in like 2014 or something. It's like Marvel, I'm
Yeah.
ready. Like call me up
Yeah.
for this. Like I'm ready to be an Asian
Yeah.
superhero. And like nothing,
Right.
nothing, nothing. And then finally Shang-Chi comes out, right? And like it's like coming back to that tweet, being
Amazing.
like, he did it. And so like, this Simon thing, I'm invested.
Great.
I'm invested now. Whenever Simon, I'm gonna think of you and be like, oh, should I leave a comment? Be like, that's a really good point. Nancy Chu has also been talking about this stuff in her, but for real,
Yes.
right? Like we're sort of part of the
Yes.
train to be part of the
Yes.
movement
Let's
together.
manifest together.
Absolutely. Yes. That's you can't get it if you can't talk
Yeah,
about it, right?
totally. Well, everyone who might be watching now or in the future, let's get Simon. All right, Jason, tell us how we can find you and how do we work with you?
Yeah. So, I have a website at jasonshen.com where I write a newsletter every week about a topic related to resilience. So that's one way to sort of stay connected. I used to post more on Twitter. I'm kind of, cooling off on the platform. So much more on
Okay.
LinkedIn, and treating LinkedIn like a social media platform and actually sharing a lot of things that I'm learning from my clients. So certainly follow me. And yeah, on my site, there's a place where you can reach out. Jason's LinkedIn. Yeah, use the QR code. You might be watching this on LinkedIn. You might be watching linkedin.com/in/Jason Shen. And yeah, I work with founders. I work with agency owners. I coach a hotel exec.
Whoa.
So wide
Yeah,
range. And if you feel like any of this resonated, then you should reach
I
out.
will. Yes. I actually subscribed to your newsletter long time ago.
Oh, thank you. It's always like, you don't really know who's
Yeah.
reading, right? Because people don't often
Yeah.
write back. Same with this live stream watching, right? But we hope it's having an effect.
Oh, I believe it. Everything adds up.
It
Yes.
does.
Well, it was
It
so
does.
good chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming onto my show.
Nancy, we've been talking about this for a
Yes.
while, so do it. Thank you again for hosting, and I'm excited for what you're doing and for
I
getting
know.
Simon on
Now I'm
board.
super excited. Now I'm gonna try again. Yes. All right. Well, see you next time. Have a good
Fantastic.
day.